too, which is great. We have a super show today. Here's a couple real simple solutions. If you go to the front page of Nutrimedical.com, go down to MG12 and just get the magnesium oil minerals. If you put a dilution of that, let's say 1 in 20 dilution in filtered water, and you want to use filtered water, it doesn't contain chlorine, fluoride, or whatever, and you can spray it on your own land or crops, the soils are going to become super powerful. It basically, if the minerals are present in the soil, the fixing bacteria and the fungi are healthy, the soil becomes super healthy, and the mineral content in your food determines the vitamin content, the color, the taste, and the nutrient value, because minerals determine the active site of every enzyme is a monoatomic superconductor form of a mineral, and that the crosstalk between the telomeres and the end of chromosomes literally talks to the ion channels to determine which minerals come in, and their harmonic resonant biophoton frequencies actually switch on and off the genes to transcribe structural proteins and enzymes. So it's a real simple formula. Life is a dance between biophotons from the telomeres of your gene complex and the ion channels that regulate mineral content to turn the genes on and off. It's like a song that goes back and forth. And so get the MG12. That's number one. Number two is make sure that you start covering your soil from two major things. One is Fukushima Daiichi and the radiation, because it's literally over the entire, not only northern but southern hemisphere to a lesser extent. And number two, the nanoparticles being put up for the last 25 plus years that are strontium, thorium, barium, and aluminum that are put there to convert the air into a plasma as part of a United Space project to actually create what's called the second level of the U.S. space shield. The first layer is theater air defense, which is a missile hit a missile, which they've deployed even along the Russian border in Poland. The second is a plasma interferometry field at 73 to 80,000 feet, where they actually can interfere with the missile guidance systems of the microchips. And the third is what's called a plasma weapon, the Tesla weapons, to actually vaporize missiles at the speed, near the speed of light, with a death ray type of system developed at White Sands Missile Base in New Mexico, and also tested in Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. What people need to understand is America, if it properly funded it, would be completely impervious to any kind of missile attack, us or our allies. We haven't fully funded it, and as a result, we don't have full missile protection. We also don't have underground either blast or radiation shelters. A blast shelter, if you're near the blast zone of a nuclear detonation, or radiation shelter if you're outside but you're downwind of a radiation plume. And as a result, Americans really don't have any Department of Defense. We have a Department of Offense. So the soil is being salted. For example, 37 United States, continental 48 states, you can detect depleted uranium because of DU munitions used for decades in testing, so that you can detect depleted uranium above the states. Almost the vast majority of U.S. states actually have significant amounts of depleted uranium. And uranium, because it's in the same place in the periodic table of elements, and I presented this with Lorraine Murray because I have a background in organic toxicology, and I presented this to her because I was the one who discovered it, that because it displaces molybdenum and chromium vanadium, which are in the same place in the periodic table, you can expect it'll jam up what's called a hexose monophosphate shunt, cause diabetes and a wasting syndrome where you lose weight faster than if you were starving to death. I've actually treated people personally who've been exposed to blue fire inside an Emerald Abrams tank that were medics. It got literally a matter of 30 to 45 seconds where they hauled someone out that got hurt inside a tank hitting with blue fire, which is ADU munitions, bouncing inside the tank and creating a vapor cloud. And one gentleman that I took care of lost 92 pounds in less than 2 months and then died. Oh. And I tried to do toxicology on his tissues, and I was threatened by Major Schwinder that if I did it, I would be fired or worse. And I said, what's worse? He said, how about dead? And I said, I know where you live, Schwinder, so don't ever dare threaten me again, or you're going to not be putting your socks on in the morning. So if you think I'm a tough guy, you have no idea how tough. Okay, so that's why I'm not exactly the guy that you want to threaten, because I have ways both in the physical and spiritual that can take you out. Yeah, so I tell the truth about these things, and I've been exposed to probably more Tier 1 classical science than any other individual who's publicly spoken on any of these issues on the planet in human history. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm telling you, I only talk about 10% of what I know, because a lot of it, even today I learn new stuff from Ann, because she's amazing, that we're in a very scary time. And they don't understand that when you look at Mount Shasta in Northern California and find 2,000 parts per million of aluminum, because it's one of the nanoparticles in the upper atmosphere to convert to a plasma, so you can create plasma interferometry giant waves to scramble the microchips in these incoming nuclear missiles. People don't understand that it's also can be used to set up what's called tectonic resonant waves to trigger off earthquakes, volcanoes, and move weather systems. So we have the capacity to completely control the weather and trigger off earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions, as well as the explosions from calderas. And it's all based on resonant harmonic physics, and I understand it exquisitely. So what people need to understand is they're going to get a level of knowledge and understanding they're not ever going to hear anywhere else except this show. Period.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
So you have a question for Ann, Steve, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just, I guess, could we say, is it accurately stated to say that we really, when we go to the store, we generally try to buy organic.
Right.
And at this time, though, even now, we really don't know.
No, that's not true. You can get certified organic. I have a certified organic bread, for example. You can do it now. There's a lot of fighting against it. But to be honest with you, corporations are in a panic mode. George Bush Sr. gave a carte blanche along with, what's his name? We call him Rumsfeld. We call, that's what we call the aspartame-laced neurotoxicity disease called Rumsfeld disease. That probably were too many aspartame-laced jelly beans that caused the neurodegeneration of Ronald Reagan.
Okay. Yeah.
So, it has diketopiperazine, which is jet fuel, formaldehyde, and methyl alcohol, which can cause blindness or brain damage. And people think aspartame is safe. I'm thinking they're nuts, and they're unqualified, and they need to shut their yap and understand there's experts like me that will tell the truth, and they don't understand. Just like you release chlorine inside the nucleoplasm of your cells if you take Splenda, which is a chlorinated optical isomer of sugar. So when people say these things are safe, they're out of their cotton-picking mind, and they need to shut the hell up. I'm sick and tired of hearing unqualified people make statements about things they have no business, like the people over at Natural News that make statements that are non-qualified and not supported by the facts.
I just had a question that came to mind. Is it possible to say what a new incoming president, president-elect, might know of these things or might be told? Are there various things that are kept from someone coming into office?
You're trying to judge the level of... Donald Trump is a genius. He's a lot smarter than people give him credit for, but he doesn't have the information. I've talked to Roger Stone many times, and also to Ron Klatz, whose best friend Bart Goldberg is known personally for 3 decades plus Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is an adaptive, amazing person, but he doesn't have this full knowledge. He doesn't understand, for example, chemical hydrofracking is dangerous as hell, and we got to stop doing it. It doesn't mean we can't frack, but you have to also understand in soil areas like in Oklahoma City, fracking causes frack quakes. It causes triggering off earthquakes. Because of the construction of the soil there, fracking does trigger off earthquakes in the Oklahoma region. In other areas, it's just simply depleting the water in the aquifers, like the Ogallala. And maybe you can kind of talk to this, because we need to move to what's called microwave fracking. But we also have to make sure there's areas like Oklahoma where they've actually tried to stop the fracking because they're putting this toxic oil and chemical-based water pumped back into the soil. It has a different specific gravity, a different rock layer, and it's triggering off frack quakes. We got to stop it in areas like that. And areas where it's safe to frack, use microwaves, and then you have to recharge it with primary water. We've had Paul Power. I've tried to get him on the program. I did a video with him a few months ago from the Primary Water Institute in Eureka, California. And primary water, he was actually doing the work for Muammar Gaddafi with a British drilling company. And the NATO planes who came in and bombed the drill rigs that were from Britain, because 75% of the new water in Libya was primary water, the water that feeds oases, and they didn't want the world. It wasn't just the gold standard that Muammar Gaddafi was coming in, because although I was a cross-dresser and weird, he had an IQ over 160. Muammar Gaddafi was not an idiot. He did more social things for his population than any other population of any country on earth in human history. Free health care, free loans on cars, free education. I mean, it's unbelievable what Muammar did for his people. with the oil money.
Yeah.
And then he brought in water. And the problem is primary water is the primary thing driving the Muslim people out of their rural areas into the big cities and from the big cities into Europe. The drought that's going on right now, which, by the way, the globalists are pushing, is part of the globalist reorganization of planetary populations and the amalgamation of forces so that we have a homogenization of the European population to a brown culture that's trans-religious, if you want to call it like Islam. And people don't understand this agenda is one that the globalists are pushing because they want to vastly reduce the population of fertility, eventually outlaw wild reproduction, and have us all in super cities where there's virtually no rural areas, including in America. If you look at the Agenda 2030 protocol and the Georgia Guidestones and others, you should realize that the wild areas where towns and cities exist, in their plan, none of these will exist. It'll be literally where the buffalo roam again. That's how crazy it is, and people think, you're just making this up. I said, no, I've been an environmentalist for half a century. I can tell you now that this is made up. And your comments.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ann?
Well, I think that if we don't start teaching ecology again, in other words, if we don't look at our biosystem from a system standpoint, then we are heading down the wrong road and we're heading towards extinction.
That's why when we have people like Donald Trump and it's going to push for energy independence, there's one coal seam where I took care of the engineers that goes right out to a park in Wyoming. That one coal seam with anthracite coal, the highest quality coal on the planet, could supply the Earth for all its energy needs for 250,000 years.
Whoa.
Right, just that one coal seam. And we're talking about clean coal technology exists. The power generators in Colorado Springs generate white fluffy clouds with no heavy metals, no nitric oxide, and no pollution. So when people say they can't believe that coal can be clean, they're idiots. In fact, the Chinese don't have clean coals. They have the dirtiest possible low-quality coal on the planet. And if we simply had a trans-Alaskan pipeline, just liquid natural gas, and sold them clean coal, they'd be laughing. They could see the sky again and the sun. They could have pollution-free cities where their children could roam outside and not die of cancer or neurodegeneration or cause birth defects. Most of their population centers in China are becoming uninhabitable. In places like Japan, you can buy oxygen cylinders so when you go on the freeways, you can get enough oxygen, you won't pass out on the freeway because the oxygen concentration is so low in some of their big cities in Japan.
Well, it's even been measured here in St. Louis at the Science Center as having fallen from 21% to 19% in the last 20 years.
Right, and so when people want to impinge on the carbon oxygen cycle, like idiots like Jill Stein, who are pseudo-environmentalists that don't understand the carbon oxygen cycle and do not understand about the danger of things like Fukushima Daiichi, because these radiotoxins released by Fukushima destroy the ozone layer, increase ground level ozone, and in things like our U.S. Space Command that have put up nanoparticles to create the second layer of the space defense shield, these things can be used for weaponizing climate and for triggering off earthquakes and volcanoes. So we've literally turned the Earth into a weapon now. And people don't understand that America has weapon systems that are literally centuries ahead of anybody else, including the Russians. The Russians are pretty advanced. But the fact is that we are deploying troops with inadequate body armor and equipment and backup. But at the same time, we have weapon systems that literally can scan a city and kill everyone in it without peeling the paint from the walls or killing or wilting the flowers in a pot in the window. That's how scary things are. They really don't understand this. And every digital communication on the planet is monitored by the NSA. Everything. There's nothing that doesn't have an AI system monitoring it. It has been for over 30-some years.
Wow.
I commend you for trying to grow crops without, that are organic, and I hope that you continue to do that.
Get organic seeds now, by the way, because they're going to get more and more difficult to get. And, when you have people like Bill Gates who are behind GMO and behind vaccines, like the harm a number of kids in India that get these vaccines like the Gardasil, you have to understand the globalists are determined, even if they release a population of genetically modified mosquitoes, they can vaccinate you with, quote, insects that are transgenic. And he did this about 4 or 5 years ago. He actually had a conference talk up in San Francisco where Bill Gates had released mosquitoes and say, someday we'll vaccinate you by insect bites. He actually did this. And people say, Dr. Deagle, you are really a psychotic idiot. No, Google it yourself. There's things I know that go beyond the public domain, and I'll once in a while go into that. But most of the stuff we're talking about is available if you go to the Google sphere and the blogosphere and you go to the internet. You're going to find it. You don't even need to go to the dark internet or have classified clearance. You're going to find all of this stuff just sitting there saying, oh my God, Deagle didn't make this shit up. And didn't make this stuff up. It's real.
Is it all right to ask something? Just one other thing. I was wondering. This is not related, or well, I guess I shouldn't say it is related. Actually,
doesn't matter. Go ask. You ask. We'll try to answer.
Since you were privy to a lot of things happening, and especially I know when you were in Colorado, were you ever able to find out more of the truth about Area 51? I mean, are there actual entities that have been helping behind the scenes to help develop some of these systems?
I'll get into a little bit of that. I'll do special programs with maybe some video this weekend when I'll talk with Leo Zagami. First off, we've had advanced communication with advanced civilizations from other parts of the galaxy. Okay, that's a fact. Number two, we've had transfer of technology. And you have to understand, many of these cultures, evil on Earth is what they call exoplanetary. Okay? If you actually go to all the ancient civilizations and the ancient cultures, the issue of the obelisk is Baal-esque is the sun god Apollo lived on Mars, and the actual symbol of the obelisk, which is before the Vatican, Washington Monument, etc., are all referred to the fact that the ancient civilizations of mankind lived on Mars. We have discovered when we went to Mars in the early 1980s monuments of ancient civilizations on Mars that were human. Okay? And the very first statement of the director of U.S. Space Command, when I was there in July 10th, 1994, was, we control every cubic centimeter of space between here and Mars. I said, do you mean the moon? And I got told off big time. He said, shut up, Deagle. This is a come to Jesus talk, so you don't freak out when you find the truth. And we have tokamak fusion miniaturized space vehicles that were coming out of service in 2010, the Aurora, and more advanced ones that are now in service now that travel regularly between our colony on Mars and Earth, but we control every cubic centimeter. The level of science that we actually possess is centuries ahead of what people think we have. Some of it is literally, if you want to call it, how can I say this? Have you ever heard of the Thule Gesellschaft, the German society? They actually channeled the technology to create gravitonic technology using circulating plasma forms of mercury to create a boundary zone of Higgs bosons. And our civilization has exhumed ancient technology that existed in Atlantis and Mu over 25,000 years ago, including the Dark Knight satellite, which is in polar orbit and has been up there probably up to 30,000 years. So people need to understand that what was really going on and what they think is going on is completely different. Human beings are not a early comer to the world. And yes, there was an Adam, which is our father of the human modern civilization, the Adam and or man from the soil. And Adam was born on Sukkot, and so was Yeshua, Jesus, born on Sukkot, and so was the time of the tribulation going to be born on Sukkot, of the Feast of Tabernacles. So, that just gives you a little intro. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you don't know, and I do. And
I had a question.
And the world is quite different than what you assume it is. And there's very ancient cultures. Mankind is not a newcomer to Earth 6,000 years ago. We've been here a long time. Okay, we're coming back. So, Steve, by the way, if you want to listen to these programs on live stream, sign up to live stream. It's free. Go to our website, to the panel just right of the big pictures in the front page of Nutrimedical, and you'll get notice when it's there. I'm also going to set up my iPad, so if you put your question in Nutrimedical 1, you can actually send your question through, and I may even eventually set up so we can have audio, so when I approve someone, they can actually, if they're approved to my Nutrimedical 1 iPad, they'll be able to actually raise their question live on the studio software, so they can actually speak live on the show, even though we have multiple guests from multiple sites all over the world. So I've set that. That's now available.
Okay.
So,
well,
tomorrow when I do two shows, I'm going to do one at 12 noon and one at, I think, 3 o'clock with Jim Fetzer, and I'll do one afterward with Ann. So I have 3 shows scheduled on Saturday, tomorrow, on live stream. Those will be live video, and we'll be able to broadcast it worldwide, and it's free. Don't have to pay a cent for it. You can watch it on your iPad, your iPhone, or your computer. You just have to pick up the live stream app if you have an iPhone or iPad, or just log on to our live stream channel, and boom, you're there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I appreciate the information, and thank you for spending time and answering the questions.
Yeah, and as I say, I'm not releasing everything I know, as you probably know that, but you're going to hear things on this program based on solid science, like Ann's really well referenced in all the material she does. I will occasionally go beyond that to things that are extremely classified Tier 1 science. The things that I acquire from first-hand evidence or from other sources that are, let's put it this way, are inside various agencies or even supernatural. So, you're going to get information here that's going to integrate and make sense to you of why we're at such a culmination. We're in, this time in history is extremely unique. So, Ann, let's get back to some of your topics. We've got issues such as radiation. We've got biosecurity. We have terrorism. I
have a question for you.
Yeah,
we were talking about other symptoms from Zika, and they have a comment here. This is the Zika virus can invade and kill 2 different brain cells, and I'd like you to... I'm going to give them to you, and then maybe you can explain them to me, because I don't know what they are. One of them is the neuroepithelial stem cells, and then the other one is the radioglial cells.
Yeah, the glial are what we call the glue cells. The word glial is a German term. They're the support cells. Basically, 99% of the cells in the brain are glue cells or glial cells, and they actually are the feeder cells that feed the astrocytes and the other nerve cells like the Purkinje cells and the cerebellum, which are the largest nerve cells. They're nutrients. They also store in the glial cells microtubules, because people have to understand that memory and neural networks are stored locally in a solid-state system called microtubules. So when you learn something, there's 3 phases. The first is what's called a neural network phase, which is a harmonic resonant phase. The second is what's called synaptic facilitation, where new synapses and new neural pathways are facilitated. And the third is what's called the neurotubular phase. And if you don't have all 3 phases working, you don't store and learn memories, and not only memories in terms of experiential memories that are based on afferent inputs like the eye or brain or touch and so on, but memories in terms of how the autonomic nervous system regulates organs. For example, every disease in the body requires a form of localized dysautonomia. So the autonomic nervous system is out of balance, and you can see it on a digital thermogram. You can also see it on a oscillographic analysis in microvolts and picoamps, and a spectral analysis of the harmonic resonance of the tissue. And the Nonlinear Institute under Dr. Nesterov has done research on this. So when you're looking at these brain cells, and the ectoderm cells that you're referring to are what I call most like the daughter cells that create astrocytes and Purkinje cells and other major cells of the nervous system. And the glial cells are if you want to call it, is almost like the drone cells inside a beehive that supply the queen, which are the astrocyte, with nutrients and support them. If you get glial cell disease and the nutrients are not present, then you end up with the astrocyte being impaired and can't create an action potential or firing potential. Does that make sense? So, when you have this effect on Zika cells, it affects what's called the unfolding protein response of the endoplasmic reticulum, and you end up with programmed cell deaths where the cell can't make the messenger RNA and proteins, and the structural proteins being deficient, the cell starts to break down, and you end up with the only surviving areas of the reptilian brain, or even just the basal ganglia if you get anencephaly. That's what happens.
Okay, well, we'll come back.
And you got a couple new topics you want to talk about. You want to mention one of the things that people should be aware of is we're moving into a Maunder-type cooling period. It happens every 360 years, which is 2 times, and we don't know why 2 times, but 2 times the alignment of Saturn and Jupiter and it's what's called a mini ice age. The scientists met with Dr. Easterbrook in Chicago 3.5 years ago, and Russian, European, and American scientists all concluded that we're heading toward a modern ice age. We've had various experts on talking about, Ice Age Now is the book. If you want to pull it up on Amazon, you should get that book. It's really worthwhile. And we've had the experts on talking about that. What's going on now is they estimated we'd be heading into it with gear shifts, so we have mixed seasons, really hot periods in the wintertime and cold in the summer. But as it settles down, 360 years ago, they had 4 feet of ice on the Thames River in London, and they were able to actually have parties in ice houses on the river. And this is also the same time period where the Norsemen had to vacate Greenland, which is if you want to call a jump-off point from Iceland toward Baffin Island and the territories, because if you sold to a European emperor some of these famous skins or tusks, like the narwhal tusk, you could literally have a lifetime of wealth by selling to the royalty of Europe or Russia. So what people don't understand is the international trade that went on for 1,000 years was cut off by the last Maunder period 360 years ago in Greenland. And we're heading into a Maunder period that will be cooler for 75 to 90 years, and it'll vastly reduce the arable land on the planet, especially in North China and Russia and northern Canada. And it'll vastly, combined with the stupid things we're doing with the weather, with nanoparticles in the upper atmosphere, and galactic and solar events caused by the approaches Nibiru Herculobus, it's called, or the destroyer red dwarf star, that's causing gravity waves to affect our climate and the release of nascent oxygen and hydrogen from ringwoodite deep in the ocean and the mantle of the Earth. We're at grave danger of a combination of stupid things we're doing and climatic changes causing drought and cooling that could be extinction level events. So we're in the midst of a whole series of converging very bad things that can affect the carrying capacity of the planet for human and non-human populations. So
the glaciers push big boulders down into as far as 40 degrees north latitude into the United States from Canada when they were developing. They actually moved the earth and the rocks.
Yeah, you go to Peggy's Cove, for example, in Nova Scotia, you can see a real good example of that. The ice sheet stopped, in Nova Scotia, and if you actually go to Peggy's Cove, you get a good example of it. And some of these boulders and so are massive. We're talking about, 10, 20,000 tons, boulders, big boulders.
Yep. Actually, we had one not too far from where I lived, and when I was a child, and we went out and visited it. My dad was interested in that kind of stuff. Okay, I want to talk about primary water, and this is just in support of that. Of what's being said about it. The Russians were drilling a borehole, a very deep, a super deep borehole, and the thought was, this was back in the 80s and the 90s,
right.
And the thought was that the deeper you went, the denser the earth got. And so they were drilling this big borehole, more as a scientific study than anything else, and
right.
It was called Kola. And it was 12.3 kilometers deep. Now, Mount Everest is 9 kilometers high, so it's
right.
3 kilometers
So it's deeper than the height of the Mount Everest.
Right, and the deepest active mine is 3.9, which is about 4, so it's about 3 times the depth of the deepest mine. And the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was 10 kilometers, so it was even deeper than the diameter of that asteroid.
Wow.
And normally when we talk about the deepest part of the ocean, we talk about the Mariana Trench.
Right.
And there have been accidents when people have gone into the trench with submarines and not come back. But it's 11 kilometers deep, so this was another kilometer deeper than that.
Yeah.
And so that just gives you an idea of how deep this thing was. Well, and this was up on the Scandinavian peninsula in Russia.
Right.
So it was very close to Finland.
Right near the Finnish border.
by the Finnish border.
You got a nice picture of that.
Yes,
Looks like it's about 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles north of Moscow.
Yes. And as they got down, as they were drilling it, they made a. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen a borehole schematic, but people who drill boreholes, they make note of what kind of material is coming out of the borehole.
Right.
Because they're drilling it, and that's the reason they drill it, is because they want to know what's under there.
Yeah, they take sections of it and then analyze the mineral content and the crystallography of it.
Yes, and the scientists there were shocked to discover that instead of a solid, dry, dense rock, massive amounts of water were found.
Right, that's what's called ringwoodite, which has anywhere from 2 to 5 to 10% water content. And when gravity waves hit it from deep space, the unstable nuclei release nascent hydrogen and oxygen. So when the water combines, there's no deuterium or tritium. It's all nascent water that's literally created de novo. And water is the primary driver of all earthquakes, and volcanoes on the earth are driven by water, because according to Northwestern University, it lowers the melting point of the mantle rock and creates magma. So magma is created by water that lowers the melting point of superheated, compressed solid rock and creates magma. So magma that drives earthquakes and volcanoes along fault lines is completely created by nascent hydrogen and oxygen released from ringwoodite and these deep rocks of the mantle. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, what the Russians interpreted this, they say it's the water from the flood, from Noah's flood in the Bible.
Oh, yeah, they're correct.
Said,
this is where it came from, the deep. These are called batholiths of water, oceans of water below the mantle, and there's also oceans of oil. The ocean of oil underneath the southwest end of the Dead Sea. And I told this because I was shown it supernaturally to FICO, the oil engineer for the Israeli oil company, and Ariel Sharon back in 1999, had 27.3 trillion barrels of oil at this one location in a batholith under the southwest end of the Dead Sea in the Middle East. And it's a primary feeder of all the oil fields throughout the Middle East from this primary one site.
Anyway, as they drilled this borehole, they found fossils more than 7 kilometers below the surface, and they don't have any idea of how they got there. Well, there probably was maybe it was hit by a meteorite or something and carried the fossils along with it, but who knows? And so I thought this article was pretty good. It was published initially by the Russians.
I'll tell you how the fossils arrived there. It's pretty straightforward. If you ever heard of a thing called what's called lithospheric disjunction, it's where the crust of the Earth actually moves in the mantle. The scientists have actually published that 8 million years ago, Alaska was on the equator. So people need to understand that the positions of continents, North and Southern Hemisphere, are completely different, say 8, 10, 20, 100, 500 million years ago. They're not in the same positions at all. And that periodically the magnetic and the rotational North Poles shift, and the continents literally drift on the mantle of the Earth, so that the hot spots are feeders. For example, we know there's a slow drift of the Hawaiian Islands over the feeders for the hot spots. So the hot spots that's currently feeding the big island of Hawaii is moving, so the island is actually being created off its own coast. So when you get a lithospheric slip, that can happen anywhere between 700,000 years and several million years, that's a very abrupt slip, which, by the way, we're due for. These slips can actually cause, let's say, up to a 10 or 20 degree rotation of the mantle and the crust of the Earth, so the actual continents slide, just like it says in the Bible that every island and every continent shall be moved out of its place. The Bible predicts a lithospheric slip at the end times. So that the actual crust, and it will move at not a high speed, but the speed, if it moves, say, 1,200 miles, which is 20% rotation, where the North Pole and so on is predictably going to move. So North America will move south by up to 1,200 miles. It'll move at the speed of a senior citizen with a cane walking 24 hours for 2 months, which is 1.2 miles an hour. So you can have a gradual shift of the positions of the star positions and the sun, because the crust of the Earth periodically does move in we call these slips that occur every so many, 750,000 to several million years. They actually happen very abruptly, and there's a lithospheric slip. Interesting, eh? And in fact, the way they discovered is U.S. Space Command, because I found out from my classified Tier 1 science, they found all these pockmarks because they were doing a thing called what's called torsion field imaging through the crust of the Earth, and they found all these giant pockmarks. They said, what the heck are these? This is 1950s, early 60s, from their satellite systems, which are classified imaging systems from space. And they were doing it so they could identify Russian submarines under the bottom of the ocean, like the Silurian Trench. And so they could see a gravity wave signature of a Russian sub up to miles below the surface of the water, not from sound, but from this gravity wave signature. And what they discovered, initially they said, what the heck are these pockmarks? So they started drilling. They discovered there were dormant magma domes, which were previously fed millions of years ago by hot spots that had moved because the mantle and the crust had a disjunction. And these are all over the world. And the primary place where they'd like to build their underground cities all over the planet are in these dormant magma domes where the crust of the Earth has moved and they're no longer fed by the hot spot, anywhere from 5, 10, 20, half a billion years ago. Interesting, eh?
Yeah, another one of the hot spots that's moving is Yellowstone.
Right.
And it's moving
Yeah, that's
east.
a slow creep, though. We're talking about something that moves over 2 months, 1,200 miles.
Oh, wow. Yes, that's Yellowstone.
That's not a slow creep. And by the way,
that fast.
it will be accompanied by lots of big earthquakes all over the place because every tectonic plate has a harmonic resonance, which is why if there's not resonant frequencies in a building that match the harmonic resonant field from the earthquake, the building will not be touched or destroyed. A building, just like noise-canceling headphones, which I say you should put along every tectonic fault line, you could create 300 microquakes a day rather than make a quake every 30 or 100 years. And we should have those here along California because the San Jacinto fault zone and the San Andreas are going to go, and the reason why they haven't gone is they're locked up north in Simi Valley with a giant lock zone that prevents them from sliding. But there's 12 feet of recoil in the rocks that's actually stored, and if it moves in one jump 6 inches, it'll destroy all the buildings within 15 to 20 miles of the fault zone, all the way from Northern California, south of San Francisco, all the way down to the Baja California, near the area of the Salton Sea. So people need to understand a big one's coming, and it's probably going to come when the lithospheric slip happens.
Well, since you were speaking of gravity waves, you could have seen gravity waves if you had been in China. What happened was that they, the mesosphere is above the stratosphere.
Right.
And it's very, it has almost no density, and everything up there is ions.
Right.
And what happened was that they had some of these, what they call noctilucent clouds forming in the mesosphere above Antarctica, for which they have no history. They can't find an analog, so they don't know why they formed. That was on the 17th.
Right.
And then in an unrelated development on November 24th, so that would be a week later, the normal dome of air glow over China split in two.
Right.
And somebody photographed it. And because we have a lot of amateur astronomers.
Right, which is hard to suppress information when these amateurs start raising questions that the Tier 1 science people are not going to answer.
Anyway, this is they call it a mesospheric bore, and it's a type of atmospheric wave that with deep ripples in it, kind of like you see at the edge of a lake or something, and you can see it in the photograph. And
right.
These are called gravity waves because
right.
gravity acts as a restoring force essential to wave motion.
Right.
An analogy would be boats and water. When a boat
right.
goes carrying across the lake, the water in front of the boat is pushed upward. Gravity
right.
pulls the water back down again, and this sets up a wave. And
right.
I'm sure that we've all seen these waves.
These waves basically are a wave in time-space. So if you actually look at it, you get a lensing effect because these ions in the upper noctilucent clouds are pushed in wave-like motions by the movement of the gravity waves, lensing literally time and space above the Earth. Isn't that interesting?
Anyway, this is where we're having a lot more reports from amateur astrologers because they have the equipment and the time, and the Congress and the administrations are pulling back on the budgets that they're giving to NASA and
they shouldn't be.
astronomers.
They should be increasing it and working with not only amateur astronomers but international, like Chinese and Russian, because the Russians are very aware of this. And this is where, for example, Professor McCanny has been on many programs on the history and other science channels. Became very, how can I say it, concerned when I pulled out the information about the Atacama Large Millimeter Array that happened to be activated earlier this year. And the Atacama Large Millimeter Array is a kind of a spin-off of the project which I helped take care of employees working at the McMurdo Base in Antarctica, because they had not only a pi meson scope, but they also had gravitonic scopes in the Antarctic ice shelf around McMurdo, and they had international scientists from Russia and China and other nations looking not only in their radio telescopes at the southern hemisphere, because they know that this dwarf star is approaching from the southern ecliptic, so you're not going to see it in the northern ecliptic. And this dwarf star, the ancient terms they call it, you can see it in the cartouches in Egypt. It's referred to in ancient Egypt and Sumeria as Herculobus Nimbus, the destroyer. The ancient idea is that there's this dragon star that returns, which is a red dwarf that has 200 times the magnetic flux field of Earth, that creates giant gravity waves and has objects as large as Neptune and Uranus circulating around it. And as it approaches the outer Oort cloud, which is 0.73 light years, the gravity waves start to affect the inner planets by increasing nuclear reactions. So the nuclear reactions inside the planet are increasing, and also the release of nascent water, which increases volcanism and earthquakes. So the reason why earthquakes and volcanoes are increasing, like Matthew 24, is the gravity waves from this dwarf star are affecting the inner planets. It doesn't need to come into the inner solar system. Some of its objects can be pushed to hyperelliptical comets, like Sighting Spring that passed us a few years ago, or what's it called? What's that other comet that's pretty, the one that comes about every 70-some years? You know which one I'm referring to.
Right.
So basically what we're looking at is this object, this dwarf star, returns like every 20-some thousand years, and I don't know the exact periodicity, but it's like tens of thousands. And when it returns in a hyperelliptical orbit, it affects the inner planets and the solar output of energy, because the sun's energy is not generated deep in the sun, it's generated in the chromosphere 100,000 miles above the sun's surface. Do you know what temperature the sun's surface is? It's only 5,000 to 6,000 degrees. It's not millions.
All right. Well, they're going to be looking at their satellite data from NASA and the Chinese Academy of Science,
right?
Because they don't know what caused this event. So this
well,
is very
if they're listening to
unusual.
this program, they can connect the dots that is created by gravity waves from deep space hitting the upper noctilucent clouds and causing gravity wave lensing. So, Ann, with this 2-hour show, we're able to cover a lot of stuff a lot deeper. I'm sure we're going to cover more stuff in the videos coming up on Saturday, and my guess is we'll be able to do it after the Jim Fetzer show, which will be somewhere around 4 o'clock.
It was very satisfying to me to be able to cover what we did in detail, especially having to do with soil infertility.
Yeah, this is really serious stuff. Of all the things you've dealt with over the last couple of years, believe it or not, that's to me one of the scariest things. The other one is, of course, the fact that Tier 1 science like gravity waves and volcanism and earthquakes and primary water, and by the way, I will try to get Paul Power from the Primary Water Institute. He's a Hungarian-American who's been drilling for 60 years all over the world, including in Libya. And the primary water would solve our drought problem, because the drought is a very major issue. The climate changes with the Maunder minimum. And the fact that we've not only have gravity waves, but we've also screwed up with the upper atmosphere, not only with release of radiation from Fukushima Daiichi, but also with inserting nanoparticles. And the way they do it, actually, is they put large Hercules C-130 type jets in the upper atmosphere, and they fly twice the height of the normal commercial airliners and release these drones that these drones that are flying military-grade patterns to release the nanoparticles in the upper atmosphere. And they're using that to create a plasma so they can interfere with the missile guidance systems of incoming missiles. It's stage 2 or layer 2 of the U.S. missile defense system, which they've underfunded.
And apparently Trump is going to continue to underfund it.
Well, I'm hoping that he'll kind of get with the program. That one of the most important things we need to do is not just deal with that. What we have to also understand is with the approach of this object, we're going to have a lot of near space objects. It turns out the U.S. Space Command only picks up 4% of the objects that are city crashers until it's too damn late, and we don't have a way of getting rid of them unless we intervene in those objects at large distances from the planet to change their trajectory, including using our Tesla weapons that are pointed out. 95% of our weapon systems are not pointed toward the planet; they're pointed out in space. And
the military gets information on that, but they won't pass it on to the private sector.
The biggest problem I found taking care of employees in any division of the government is one section of the government, like Space Command, doesn't talk to the Navy. The Navy doesn't talk to the NSA. The NSA doesn't talk to the FBI. The FBI doesn't talk to the CIA. These agencies aren't talking to each other unless there's one individual that thinks they absolutely have to, and in most cases that doesn't happen. So our biggest problem...
All right, Dr. Diggle.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to do a show tomorrow afternoon, hopefully just after Jim Fetzer's program on live stream. So thank you, Ann. It was great to do this 2-hour special, and we will be back in a minute with the firing line with Michelle. And stay tuned. We're going to answer your health and wellness questions coming up.